The studio lights of Loose Women always felt warmer than they needed to be, soft, flattering, and forgiving. On this particular morning, however, the warmth carried an edge. There was a hum in the air that producers could feel but not yet explain, the kind of tension that prickled before a live broadcast when something unpredictable threatened to slip through the cracks of careful planning. Piers Morgan sat in his chair with the confidence of a man who had never learned the meaning of retreat. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, his expression composed into a half-smile that suggested both charm and challenge. He had been invited to discuss his latest column, a provocative piece on free speech and cancel culture that had already sparked fierce debate online. For Piers, controversy wasn't a side effect of his work, it was the engine. Across from him sat Denise Welch, relaxed in posture but sharp in presence. She wore a bright blouse that mirrored her mood, calm on the surface, blazing underneath. Denise had never shied away from confrontation, especially when she felt an argument crossed from debate into personal attack. She had read Piers's column the night before, and every paragraph still rang in her head like an unanswered accusation. As the countdown clock hit 0, the familiar theme music played, and the host smiled into the camera. "Good morning, everyone," the lead presenter began brightly. "Today we're joined by broadcaster and columnist Piers Morgan, here to talk about free speech and public accountability." Piers leaned forward, nodding. "Delighted to be here," he said smoothly. Denise offered a polite smile, though her eyes betrayed little warmth. The conversation started gently enough. Piers spoke about the importance of open dialogue, about how society, in his view, had grown intolerant of dissenting opinions. Denise listened, arms folded loosely, occasionally raising an eyebrow but staying quiet. The other panelists chimed in with cautious questions, careful not to ignite anything too explosive too early. Then Denise spoke. "Piers," she said evenly, "you frame your argument as if people are being silenced, but isn't it true that what you're really upset about is facing consequences for what you say?" The studio audience murmured softly. Piers smiled, but there was steel behind it. "No, Denise. What I'm upset about is the mob mentality, people deciding that if they don't like an opinion, the person holding it should be destroyed." Denise tilted her head. Destroyed? Or simply challenged? The presenter tried to move things along, but Piers was already warming up. "Look," he said, voice rising slightly, "I've been challenged my entire career. That's fine. What isn't fine is the hypocrisy, people preaching tolerance while being utterly intolerant of views they dislike." Denise inhaled slowly. "You talk about intolerance," she replied, "yet many of your columns single out individuals, women, minorities, and reduce complex issues to inflammatory soundbites. That's not free speech, that's provocation for profit." The smile vanished from Piers's face. "That's absolute nonsense," he snapped. "I criticize ideas and behaviors, not identities. If people feel uncomfortable, maybe they should examine why." The temperature in the studio shifted. Camera operators exchanged glances. A producer behind the scenes leaned closer to their headset. Denise straightened in her chair. "That's a convenient excuse," she said. "You provoke, then act shocked when people respond emotionally. Words have impact, Piers. You know that better than anyone." Piers laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Oh please. Are we really doing this? I'm not responsible for how fragile people feel." There it was. The line that cracked the room. Denise's eyes flashed. "Fragile," she repeated. "You don't get to dismiss genuine hurt as fragility just because it doesn't affect you." The presenter attempted to intervene. "All right, let's." "No," Denise continued, turning fully toward Piers. "You've built a career on attacking others and calling it honesty. But honesty without empathy is just cruelty dressed up as courage." The audience broke into applause, some cheering, others gasping. Piers leaned back, arms crossed. "This is exactly the problem," he said coldly. "Emotional blackmail. If someone disagrees with you, they're cruel. That's how debate dies." Denise shook her head. "Debate dies when one person dominates the conversation and refuses to listen." The exchange had become a duel, each sentence sharper than the last. Producers signaled frantically from behind the cameras, urging the hosts to steer the discussion back to safer ground. But neither Piers nor Denise was willing to yield. "You know what, Denise?" Piers said suddenly. "You and shows like this thrive on outrage. You invite people like me on just to shout us down." Denise laughed incredulously. You were invited to talk, not to lecture. There's a difference. The presenter's voice cut in again, strained. Let's take a breath. But Piers was already standing. This is a farce, he declared. I came here for a discussion, not a kangaroo court. Gasps rippled through the studio. Denise rose halfway from her chair, disbelief etched across her face. No one put you on trial, she said firmly. You were asked to answer for your words. Piers pointed toward the panel. And this is what happens when you do, ambush. A producer's voice crackled in his earpiece, unheard by the audience but urgent. The presenter looked pale. Piers, she said carefully, if you could just sit back down. He didn't. I won't be spoken to like this, Piers snapped. This show claims to represent women's voices, but all it does is bully anyone who doesn't agree. Denise stood fully now. That's rich, she shot back. Coming from a man who interrupts women for a living. The audience erupted, applause, boos, and stunned laughter colliding into chaos. Piers shook his head. I'm done, he said, grabbing the microphone from his lap and placing it on the table. Absolutely done. Security staff hovered at the edge of the set, unsure whether to step in. The presenter's smile had vanished entirely. Piers, she began, but he was already walking off camera. Denise watched him go, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. As the studio fell into an uneasy silence, the presenter turned back to the camera, struggling to regain composure. Well, she said softly, that was unexpected. The show cut to an early commercial break. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Producers whispered urgently, phones buzzing with alerts as clips of the confrontation began spreading across social media within minutes. Hashtags formed instantly, opinions hardening on both sides. And in a quiet corridor away from the lights, Denise stood alone for a moment, heart racing, not from fear, but from the knowledge that this moment was far from over. Because when someone like Piers Morgan walked off a live show, he never truly left the conversation. The commercial break ended, but the calm never returned. When Loose Women came back on air, the studio felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were listening. The empty chair where Piers Morgan had been sat loomed like an accusation. The presenter cleared her throat, forcing a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Welcome back, she said. We've had a lively discussion this morning. The audience laughed nervously. Denise Welch remained standing for a moment before slowly sitting down. Her hands trembled slightly, not from regret, but from adrenaline. Years in television had taught her how quickly moments like these became headlines, how a single exchange could eclipse decades of work. Behind the cameras, producers were already in crisis mode. He's tweeting, one assistant whispered urgently. Of course he is, another replied. Backstage, Piers Morgan stood in the corridor, phone in hand, jaw clenched. His reflection stared back at him from a darkened monitor, angry, defiant, unyielding. Within seconds, his fingers flew across the screen. Kicked off Loose Women for refusing to bow to groupthink. So much for open debate. The tweet exploded instantly. Inside the studio, Denise took a breath as the presenter gently turned toward her. Denise, she asked, do you want to respond? Denise paused. She knew whatever she said would be dissected, clipped, weaponized. Yes, she said calmly. I do. She looked directly into the camera. This wasn't about silencing anyone, she began. It was about accountability. Debate doesn't mean one person gets to dominate, dismiss, or belittle others. Especially on a show built on conversation. Applause rippled through the audience, this time stronger, steadier. But I want to be clear, Denise continued. No one was kicked off for having an opinion. Piers chose to leave. That sentence would be quoted everywhere. Meanwhile, Piers paced backstage, fury simmering beneath his composure. A producer approached cautiously. Piers, maybe we can talk. No, he snapped. I've said everything I need to say. But even as he spoke, part of him knew this moment was bigger than anger. Controversy was oxygen to his career, but this time, the reaction felt different. Louder, sharper, divided. By the afternoon, news outlets had picked up the story. Piers Morgan storms off Loose Women after on-air clash. Denise Welch stands her ground in heated TV showdown. Clips flooded social media. Some praised Denise for finally saying what needed to be said. Others defended Piers, accusing the show of bias and ambush. Celebrities weighed in. Commentators chose sides. That evening, Denise sat at home, watching the replay in silence. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages of support, a few of criticism, and some from colleagues who knew exactly how moments like this felt. She exhaled and leaned back. I didn't plan that, she murmured to herself. But I don't regret it. Across town, Piers prepared for his own appearance, on another show, another platform, another microphone. He adjusted his tie, expression resolute. They won't shut me up, he told a producer. They never do. But beneath the bravado, there was something else, the realization that this time, the conversation wasn't entirely under his control. The next morning, Loose Women opened with record viewership. The presenter addressed the audience directly. Yesterday sparked a debate far beyond our studio, she said. And while opinions differ, one thing is clear, these conversations matter. Denise nodded beside her. Not because she had won. Not because Piers had lost. But because, for once, the argument wasn't just noise. It was being heard. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, one truth lingered. Sometimes walking off doesn't end a debate. It only proves how powerful it has become.